Okay, today we are diving into a real Australian court case. And this is a story so extreme, it honestly reads like a thriller. It's got everything: a bitter divorce, a massive business empire, and a husband who seriously thought he could make millions of dollars just disappear.
So let's just start with a number. Take a look at this: $5,886,842. That is the exact amount of cash a husband was ordered to pay his wife. But here's the kicker. This wasn't money that was sitting in some bank account or, tied up in stocks. No. This was for assets that were completely gone. I mean, vanished from any balance sheet. We're talking about phantom money.
So that brings us to the real question of this whole explainer. When one person deliberately creates what the court itself called an evidentiary black hole, they hide all the proof, how on earth can a judge possibly find the truth and deliver justice? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go back to the beginning.
So to really understand how we got to that absolutely staggering judgment, we need to rewind a bit and meet the couple who are at the very center of this financial storm.
So this is the story of Miss Zhuo and Mr. G. Their life together spanned a full 15 years. And get this, they started with basically nothing. But through a ton of hard work, some family help, and a few loans, they built this sprawling, incredibly complex business empire. But then, in 2022, the whole thing just came crashing down.
And this slide right here, this really reveals the central power dynamic in their relationship. On one side, you've got Miss Zhuo. She contributed to the family, but she was pretty much shut out from the complicated finances of their 18-plus companies and trusts. And on the other side, Mr. G. He had absolute control, moving money between his personal and business accounts so freely that the lines between them just got completely blurred. You can see how this was the perfect setup for financial secrecy.
So, when the marriage finally ended, Mr. G didn't just decide to fight his wife. No, he decided to declare war on the entire legal process. And that decision would ultimately seal his fate.
His strategy was just so systematic and brazen. First, he flat out refused to disclose any of his financial records. Then, he completely ignored court orders that were meant to freeze the assets. And then he went on to sell and transfer properties and company shares. And then, he made every single dollar from those sales just vanish. Poof. He created that evidentiary black hole on purpose. But the judge saw right through it. This quote from the judgment is so important. You see, the court didn't see a lack of evidence. It saw a deliberate cover-up. And because of that, it inferred that the evidence he was hiding must be pretty significant.
Just when you think this whole thing couldn't get any more dramatic, a new set of characters enters the stage: the husband's parents. They jumped into the case with this bombshell claim they thought would save their son. Instead, it backfired spectacularly.
So their story was that they had loaned their son nearly $5 million over the years. Now, this was a really strategic move. See, if the court accepted this as a legitimate debt, that money would have to be paid back to them before Ms. Woe got a dime, which would have drastically shrunk the asset pool. But their entire plan just crumbled under the slightest bit of scrutiny. The judge found their evidence, and this is a direct quote, incredible. Why? Well, for starters, they'd signed legal documents in English, a language they admitted they couldn't even read. Their testimonies were suspiciously, almost word for word, identical. The so-called loan agreements? Turns out they were created after the divorce had already started, and there was zero proof of any interest payments or any demands for repayment ever. Their attempt to help their son, it ended up being the final nail in his coffin.
So with the husband refusing to cooperate and his parents' testimony totally dismissed, the judge was left with this huge problem. There was no clear evidence of where the money was. So how did he pull justice out of this black hole? He used two really powerful legal principles.
The first tool is called an adverse inference, and it's actually a beautifully simple concept. It basically says that if you deliberately hide evidence from the court, the judge is legally allowed to assume the worst. They can infer that whatever you're hiding is bad for your case. So Mr. Zhai's secrecy was literally turned into a weapon against him. The second tool is even more powerful. It's called the add-back principle. The judge declared this case exceptional, which allowed him to use it. This principle lets the court take the value of assets that have been recklessly spent or deliberately hidden and add them back into the asset pool as a notional asset, a phantom asset. It's like the court saying, hey, we know you had this money,
And since you won't tell us where it is, we're just going to count it anyway.
So, armed with these two principles, the judge delivered a final judgment that was just absolutely devastating for Mr. G. Let's break down exactly what that looked like, because it is something else. I mean, the sheer totality of this outcome is just staggering. Miss Wu was awarded 100% of all the known assets. 100%. On top of that, Mr. G was ordered to pay her that cash sum of nearly $5.9 million. That's the added back money, plus almost $190,000 in overdue support payments. And his parents' claim for their so-called loan? Dismissed. They got zero. It was a complete and total victory for Miss Wu. So, what can we all learn from this absolutely wild case? It offers some incredibly powerful and, frankly, pretty stark lessons about how the justice system deals with dishonesty. First and foremost, honesty isn't just the best policy. In court, it's the only policy. Mr. G tried to play a game with the court, and he found out the hard way that the court has way more power and a much longer memory than any one person. It is a game you simply cannot win.
Second lesson, money you try to make disappear doesn't actually vanish into thin air. It just transforms. The court's add-back principle is like a legal sledgehammer that turns those phantom assets into a very real, very concrete debt that you are now legally on the hook to repay.
Third, and this is a huge warning for anybody with informal family financial dealings, if you loan money to family, you have to formalize it. You need clear written agreements and a history of repayment. Without that proof, the court is very, very likely to just see it as a gift, not a legally enforceable debt. And finally, this case perfectly shows that a mountain of flawed, fabricated evidence is completely worthless. The parents brought in documents and testimony, but because it was all confected, as the judge put it, it meant absolutely nothing. A single, credible piece of evidence will always, always outweigh 100 lies.
This quote just perfectly captures Mr. G's fundamental mistake, doesn't it? He tried to outsmart the referee, and in doing so, he guaranteed he would lose the game. It was the most foolish move he possibly could have made. So we'll end on this thought. In his attempt to make his assets disappear into an evidentiary black hole, Mr. G instead created a $6 million debt black hole for himself. It's a perfect, almost poetic reversal. And it really makes you wonder, perhaps justice isn't just about finding the truth, but about creating consequences that perfectly mirror the deception.